Hey everybody, it's Casey here at Sea Run Fly and Tackle. Steelhead season's here. You know what? It's time to mop up some steelhead with a mop tail jig. Alright, so to tie up this jig, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of our Compleat Angler painted jig heads. I'm going to do this one on a 1/4 size in the color Pearl Pink. You're not handcuffed by the color that I chose for this jig head. I'll tie it in other color combinations as well. You know, a hot orange, pink, or even a chartreuse, white. I mean, playing with colors is fun. You know, you can have a bunch of different ones tied up in the box and just see which one grabs your attention on a given day when you're on the water. And if you got confidence in that thing, chances are you're going to fish it with confidence. And that really helps putting fish on the bank. But for this one, as a whole, I kind of like that pink pearl. I think it looks pretty cool on this jig. As far as sizes go, 1/4 for a drift jig is sort of the most common that I tie. I'll tie them a little bit smaller for a little bit lower water conditions. But I typically won't go heavier than a 1/4. If you have a specific spot that's deeper, that you want that jig to get down into faster, by all means, you can bump it up a little bit bigger if you like. So we've got the jig fixed into our vise. So for thread, I'm going to use 140 denier ultra thread in the color fluorescent pink. I just find that the pink kind of hides up towards the jig head there a little bit. It doesn't get noticed as much, doesn't stand out. Not that it's really going to matter, but again, something that looks good in the box that you have confidence in is something that you're going to fish a lot harder. I notice that when I go grab a fly or a jig or whatever, I'm always going for what looks nicest to me in the box first. I've got the most confidence in that, and I'm going to fish that the hardest. So just like I always do, I'm going to put down a little bit of a foundation of thread just to build this fly on. And I'm going to leave a little section of the hook bare at the end there. Reason I'm going to do this, one, the body doesn't need to be as long as this hook shank. And why I like to leave it at about that point is I can thread a piece of prawn on there, a roe bag, or whatever I want to use for bait. Adding bait to your jig definitely helps as far as hooking fish. Having a little bit of scent on there is always a good thing. So for the tail on this mop jig, I'm going to use some Hairline UV Galaxy mop chenille in the color fluorescent shrimp pink. With this material, it doesn't really fray at the end, but just to kind of make it look a little more wormy, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit it with a lighter and just flame the very end of it, and it's going to give it a little bit of a taper and just makes it look more like a worm. We're going to tie this in. If it's not quite straight, if it's a little kinky, you can give it a little bit of a pull and it'll straighten this material right out. We'll trim that guy off, secure that in with a few more wraps. And like I was saying, there's still plenty of room there to add some bait onto that hook. Next material I'm going to tie in, something that's a little bit more popular from the trout fishing world, but I think it works excellent on these jigs. This is the Alchemists tying range UV Blob Fritz. I'm going to use this in 10mm in the color coral. And with this, there's a braided core in the center here. I'm just going to pull some of this material off to expose that core to give myself a nice clean tie-in point. And we'll tie that in right where we tied off the tail. Give it 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll call it 5 wraps is good there. Trim that off. A couple more wraps just to secure everything. Next, I'm going to take 2 Schlappen feathers, both Nature Spirit Fish Hunter Schlappen, one being in the color fluorescent orange and then in fluorescent Steelhead orange. Why I'm going to do 2 feathers is just for a little bit of color contrast in there. I'm going to tie both of these in by the tip. And I'm not going to go right in at the tip for 2 reasons. The stem on these feathers is quite fine and fragile at the front of those feathers at the very tip. And I also want a little bit more length out of this Schlappen. So I'm going to go tie in a little bit further back where I can get into that longer stuff and even into the fluffy stuff at the end there, which is almost like marabou, and it'll just give that jig more movement in the water. Trim off our ends. And I'm just going to wrap these together side by side, or palmer them towards the head of the jig. And you can see that color combo, like I was saying, just kind of gives it almost like a variegated or, you know, some kind of contrasting kind of color in there. Just grab a bodkin every now and again just to help tease stuff out that might be getting wrapped around the shank when you're palmering those feathers. And we'll wrap those right up behind the head of the jig. Tease some of those little bits out. And then just to dress this up and hide our thread wraps there, again, not that the fish is going to care, but I do. I'm going to take a little bit of Hairline ice dub in fluorescent hot pink. And I'm just going to spin a little bit of that dubbing onto my thread. Doesn't have to be much. We're not trying to make a great big giant egg with this. We've got that already with the jig head here. Just doing a little bit of housekeeping, tidying things up. So just a couple of wraps just to hide that mess. Adds a little bit more sparkle as well too. Do a couple of whip finishes. Glue those thread wraps. Like I said, add your favorite bait, or even the thing I'll use is the ProCure water-soluble fish oil scents. Why I use the water-soluble as opposed to like the super gel or the regular oils. This is water-based, so it's much thinner and it won't gum up all these feathers. What happens if this gets all gummed up? It doesn't move in the water, doesn't breathe, pulsate, look alive, and it doesn't wash out. I mean, it's nice that it doesn't wash out, but it can make everything all gummy in your box when you try and put these things away. They get all matted up, they look like garbage, dirt sticks to them, and you end up tossing your jig. This stuff, you do have to apply it a little bit more often, but you can wash it out of your jig and it'll still be reusable after the next day. And having, like I said, having some bait and some scent in there is a big difference maker when you're fishing these jigs. I'll fish these like I would any sort of float fishing setup, just like you're fishing for chum as an example. You know, if you're doing that for salmon fishing in the fall, I'll do the exact same thing with my steelhead rig. This is heavier than, say, if I was using a soft bead, a pink worm, something like that. This is going to be what determines how deep I fish. So if I'm fishing 3 feet in between, say, my float and my weight when I've got a non-weighted presentation on, like a soft bead, if I'm using my jig, I want my jig to be 3 feet under my float. if I have 3 feet in between my float and my weight, and I'm on, you know, 3.5 feet of water or whatever, this thing's just going to be dragging along the bottom. We want this to be above the fish. We want the fish looking up at it and going, hey, that looks delicious. Or, hey, that's making me mad. I'm going to go attack that thing. So, seen a lot of people tying jigs lately, coming into the store, getting all geared up for steelhead season, and just still carrying over from salmon. So I wanted to do a quick jig video for you. I feel like I've neglected you guys a little bit with these and doing more flies. So first one back that I've been, you know, after the summer, gonna did this jig up for you guys. Fish it. It's got a big worm on the back. They're gonna love this thing. I'd love to see how you guys do with that one. Hope you guys like this video. Smash that like button for us. Subscribe to us on YouTube. And like always, check us out online, www.c-run.com. Thanks for watching, everybody.